So I've been shooting and scanning film now for a bit over a year, so I think it's time for me to actually make a video on how I DSLR scan my film. So let's just get into it. When I first started shooting film last year, I was dropping off my film at different kind of labs where I lived, and I would never get the good results that I would have expected. The scans would either be like really low resolution, and also the colors would just be super off and not exactly what like it would look like in person. I didn't start investing money into the scanning setup at first, so the first couple things that I bought when I started DSLR scanning was just this light on Amazon and this little film holder, and that entire setup was like well over $100, and the scans were not too great, but I did learn a lot from that first experience. After a few months, I decided to actually invest more into my scanning setup, and so far I think it's pretty good. I've been scanning my 120 and 35 really well, and I feel like those photos are good enough to actually get printed. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with what I've got right now. So I think it's time to do a quick breakdown on all the gear that you need in order to DSLR scan. The first thing that you need is obviously a light in order to scan your film. So ideally you want to get a good light that actually emits a actual white light. I know that's kind of weird to say that, but there's a lot of lights that say that they're white, but they're like either orange or super blue, and you got to make sure that you have a good one. So this is what I was using when I first started scanning film, and it worked pretty well. I'm not gonna lie, not too bad. But what I have right now is a scanning setup from Negative Supply. I have their entire kit, not the copy stand, but I do have the light and like the film holders, and I absolutely love it. The next thing that you need is a film holder. This is what I started up with, and it works pretty well, like I said before, but ideally you'd want to get a scanning setup like what I have right now, where you can just feed a roll of film into it and you can just go through that in like 2 minutes or 3 minutes and scan that entire roll, and it's super quick. Now that I shoot 120, I have a 120 film holder and a 35mm holder, and both of them work pretty much the exact same, and you can blast through rolls super quick, which is amazing. The next thing that you need is a copy stand or a tripod. Ideally, you want to use a copy stand because you can just set up your camera on it and it just points straight down, rather than using a tripod, which I did for a long time, and it takes forever to actually figure out if it's actually straight down. So make sure you get a copy stand. I got one on Amazon and there's like $100 or so, and it is well worth it. What you're gonna need next is a remote shutter in order to take the photos without touching your camera, to make sure that there's no shakes in any of the scans, because that is super annoying, and I've definitely had to rescan stuff because of that. Lastly, you're going to need a macro lens. So ideally you'd want to get a good macro lens so you can get sharp photos of your scans. What I did for a while though is I used some extension tubes with my 24-70, and it worked all right. The photos were like not as sharp as it could have been. The edges were pretty soft, but the inside, or like the middle of the photos, were still really sharp. So I mean, it worked, but not that great. As soon as I started shooting with my macro lens that I just got recently, this thing right here, the 70mm 2.8, all of my photos have just looked super crisp and just like perfect quality, and like I just absolutely love it. So I would really recommend getting a solid macro lens. The one that I have is only like $300 or like $350 on eBay, so it's not too bad. So before you start scanning with your DSLR, you have to fix some settings first. The first setting is obviously you need to be shooting in RAW. Second, you have to set your white balance. Usually I just set mine at daylight. After that, you got to set the mode to aperture priority. The reason why you have to set it to aperture priority is because each individual photo in the roll will be a little bit different depending on the lighting of that photo, and it'll compensate the lighting when you are shooting at aperture priority. Usually the aperture that I set my film at, or set my my camera at when I'm scanning, is around from f8 to f10. And the last setting that you have to do, that I personally do, but you probably shouldn't depending on what camera you have, is setting your focus to autofocus. And what I usually do is I just set it to continuous autofocus personally, because I shoot with a new modern camera, which is a Sony a7 IV, and the autofocus on that thing is literally perfect, and I've never had it miss focus on me ever. But with my old camera, my a7 III, I had to set that at a manual focus and had to use focus peaking in order to make sure I didn't miss. The next thing you have to do before you scan your film is make sure that you are scanning your film emulsion side down. If you don't know what the emulsion side is, that is the glossy side of your film negative, and that is basically where all of the grain is in. So flip that upside down when you are inserting it into your film carrier, and it should remove some of the random reflections from the room, so you don't have to worry about any kind of light leaking onto your scan. An easy way to show that you are scanning on the emulsion side down is that when you are looking at the negative, the information on the film should be flipped. The majority of the time that I'm scanning, I have all of my lights off and everything in my room, so I don't have any distracting lights at all in my scans, and that's the easiest way to actually do it without any kind of light. So when you are scanning your film, please make sure to not bump or touch anything, or else you will have a blurry photo. Usually when you have your f-stop set to like f8 or f10, you will still be shooting your shutter speed around like 1/15 or 1/10, and you really have to be wary so you don't have to rescan the roll. Once you have finished your roll of film, then you got to eject the SD card from your camera and import it into Lightroom. In order to convert your negatives into a positive, you have to download a plugin called Negative Lab Pro. I know there's a few different kinds of plugins, but that's the one that I use personally. It's $100, and in my opinion, I think it is well worth it. Once you have downloaded the plugin, you have to fix some stuff before you import it onto that plugin. First, you have to set the white balance of the border by clicking the eyedropper on the white balance on the border of the film negative. After that, you have to crop the photo and then sync it to the rest of that roll of film. Make sure the framing is perfect on every single one of those photos, and then you can convert all of them at the exact same time. Once you can see the positives, then I would only recommend adjusting the white balance and doing small adjustments of the exposure. And then I'll go to the little drop down at the top where you can go and adjust the different settings that they have, like highlights hard, highlights soft, shadows hard, shadows soft. And then another one that I actually use is deep as well, which is also really nice. And then once you are done tweaking the photos on that roll, then you can click apply. Once you are back on Lightroom, then you can export all of those photos and export them as TIFFs. Once you've exported them as TIFFs, then you can import it onto Lightroom again, and then you can edit those normally just as like a normal photo, and you are pretty much good to go.